Hi, I'm Mark, one half of Solardo. I'm here with Computer Music Magazine today to speak you through exactly how we make tracks. I'm going to go through our workflow, the arrangement, the mixing. I want to go from start to finish, and you're going to see how I put things together. I'm using today a CR2 sample pack, our own one, and I want to show you how I use all the elements as one to make a track. So when I start a track, I'll start off with a template which I use for every track possible, well, every track I ever do, and do it by making group channels for each of the main components of the track. So I'll have the mid beats, which is basically the mid-range parts of the beat, the top beat, which is the top end of the beat. Also in the mid beats, I also put the bottom end, so like the kicks and that sort of thing. Then I'll also do a top beat left and top beat right. And the reason for that is because when you go through group channels and you send it from, say for instance, your hi-hat is on your left or going to the left, but it's going through a group channel, the group channel will automatically center it because you're going to be sending the signal from whatever, let's say a hi-hat for instance, to that group channel. And even if it's on the left on that hi-hat channel, it goes to the group and the group is centered, you're therefore going to have no variation. It's not going to go left or right. So that's why I have to make a separate channel for the top beats left and the top beats right, and then on these each individual channels I'll then left and right them, which I have done there and there. And the top beat obviously stays in the centre, and the mid beat, which is the bottom end as well, also stays in the centre. I'll also then get one for the synths and then one for the samples, and sometimes it depends on what the sort of track I'm making. I might have a vocal track, but in this case where I only use a bit of the vocal sample, I'll put it into the sample area. Because you don't need to be that dynamic with it. You don't need to think too much into it. If I was doing a vocal, I'd make a vocal group channel, just like I've done with the beats for the top, left, and right, so that if I was going to be doing any sort of dynamics on a vocal whereby one goes to the right and one goes to the left, I'd have to, and they're going through this group channel, there has to be a left and right in play, which I don't have here, but I would do if I was doing a full vocal track. And then on each of these different groups, I always use the same setup. So I use a plug child 670 stereo, which is basically just, for me, I just bring it all together with it. And I don't do anything complicated with it whatsoever because I'm not really a complicated sort of guy. I just go with the basics and it just all comes together in the end. So I use a preset, sorry, and it's a Drew Laven vintage mastering glue. So I just find that if I have this on each one of these group channels, it'll just bring together the parts, the elements which are sticking through that group. So you get the actual completed sound opposed from, sounds just coming out a little bit, sound out of place. And then after that, in the chain, I'll have the Pew Tech. I don't know how you say it, but it looks like, I don't know what it looks like, but it says Pew Tech. And again, I use the Laven track warmer, which is again is a preset. You go down to Drew Laven and just click down track warmer, and that basically warms up all your elements within that group. And then the last bit, I'll use the L1 limiter, and I'll pull this down just to bring up the volume of that whole set. So the whole thought process behind it, and I don't know if anyone ever does this, but this is just my way of doing it, is that the first part, which is the Pewtech 670, is to bring everything together, make it sound as one, make it sound like it's meant to be together. The second part is the Pewtech EQ-P1A stereo, and that's just to warm it up, make the whole track sound warmer, and have a lot more, instead of it sounding tinny, or just give it an overall round warm sound, which you want your end mix to sound like. And then again, the L1 limiter, and that's just solely to bring up the volume of the track. A lot of people don't do it this way, but I do it just because I've tried recently, doing it without, because I've been in the studio with loads of different producers and they just don't use this whatsoever. But for me, because I'm just so used to doing it, it's just my way of doing stuff, and it just brings it all together. And I always end up getting a lot better mix doing this than what I would do without. So that's each of the individual group tracks. Then also on the master, I'll have an Ozone 8 running, which I think is just amazing to give you an idea of what the master will actually sound like. So sometimes I'll make the track without the Ozone on, but most of the time I'll always have it on because it gives me, like I said, an idea of how it's going to sound, and I just find it a lot easier. I'll flick in between it being on and off just to get an idea of where it sits, the actual mix pre-mastering. Maybe mess around with it, then turn it back on, mess around with it again, and then eventually I'll get the right idea of where I'm going. And the reason why I use this ozone is because, like I say, I'm not technical in any way, shape, or form. And this piece of equipment is just so good that you can run. If you loop the main part of the track where you've got everything going off, so say if you've got your bass line, all your beats in, your synth on top, maybe your vocals, so you've basically at that point of the track, which is like the loudest, all you have to do is press this master assistant here. And then I always do target for CD quality, intensity medium. I think if you go low, you're probably not doing enough. If you go high, you run the risk of hearing something which isn't going to be the actual end product. So I just keep it medium, that easy. Click next. You play the audio and it will just run the analysis for you and just give you a basic master. And I'll do that with all my tracks, when I play out as well. So if I want to test out one of these tracks, I'll always have my own self master, which is just this Ozone 8 preset option. Done, dead easy. Also on the master, I use this Camelfat, which is, I have no idea what it does, but Camelfat, actual the artist Camelfat, told me to use this Camelfat and just said that all you need to do on here is select clear preset and it will stop your master from clipping. I've got no idea how it does it, but it does it. And if you just play the tune here, you'll see. This is the master here. So let me just do it without. It sounds the same, but technically isn't. Well, I'm doing it on camera, so it's not working now. But usually that master would show it as clipping. So you just turn it on as that blank template and it'll just take off all the clipping and just give you a better sounding track. Even though I don't know if it sounds different, but I just know that when you see the actual file afterwards, you don't have any clipping on it. And to keep things tidy, do these folders on Cubase. It's probably the same on Ableton and Logic or whatever you might use. Just because when I make tracks, I end up having lots and lots of different elements to it. So this way it just keeps it tidy. So then next I'll start making a beat. Again, I've made a folder for it. I open up the folder here in Cubase and you can see each of the individual elements. A lot of this stuff might be pretty basic and straightforward, so I'll just skip through it dead quickly. But for those of you who want to know what I do, I'll just briefly show you. So say if I just take a loop here in the main part of the track where everything's going off. That bit there. So start with the kick. Again, when making tracks, I think it's imperative that you find the best samples. So I'll search them. I've got go-to sample packs, and I usually go for the analog-based sample packs, the ones where they've actually taken from machines, so you're getting the best sounding quality, because it makes life a lot easier in the long run, and you just get a better sounding track. So this kick here sounds good. It's solid. It's got everything going on. And all I need to do on this is, because I found a good sample to start with, I use an SSL compressor, a stereo comp, and again, it's just so easy. This is all I do is mess around with the threshold, and in this case here, I've hardly used any, but you can see the compression itself is just kicking just above 4 dB. But take it off, you can hear it's quite loose. If you turn it on, it just tightens up that kick. It makes a massive difference in the mix. But also what it does, what I've noticed is, if you put too much of it on, it takes the bottom end out. So you just got to really just mess around. So that's it there. And I'll just mess around with the threshold up until I get the perfect sounding solid kick. And then I use an EQ on it, which is obviously self-explanatory. I use a Fab Filter Pro Q3, turn up to 50 Hertz, and basically it's pretty straightforward. You just do it by ear, and whatever works for you, whatever sounds best, just do that. And then with that kick, as I spoke about the group channels earlier, I'll send this over to the mid beats. I call it mid beats, but it's probably should be the low beats, but whatever. That's just what I call it. And then that'll get sent via the send, I send a whole lot over to the mid-beat area. And now with the clap, again, I look for decent claps. And I usually use quite a few of them to give you the full sound. So in this case, I've used a clap and a snare. This is a clap. And again, on this one, I've used the SSL comp. As I said earlier, I use it on all the elements of the track, usually. So you've got to be careful when you use this SSL comp, because if you use it too much and go over your mix too in depth with it, you'll lose the width of each of the sounds. So always do it by ear. And I'll flick between my monitors and headphones just to get an idea. I mean, I'll start doing the main mix and the main bulk of the track on these monitors, and then I'll go, once I've got a finished track, on my headphones. I'll mix it again on my headphones, usually sat in front of the TV. Then the next day I'll come back and then listen to my new mix, which I've done on my headphones, and then mix it again on these. And then usually you'll get a good sounding mix. So again on this, like I said, use SSL comp, the FabFilter EQ, take the bottom end out. I also take the top end out all the time on pretty much everything, because in this area here, particularly the top end, you always have like a really high frequency that usually you can't hear. You can hear it in a club, because if you have a bad mix of a track and you have too much top end here, you usually come out of a headache. You're not hearing it, but you're feeling it. And like everyone does, or everyone should do, you take the bottom end out of the clap. And again, it's just a whole process you just do by ear. I'll then use the snare, which is this. And the reason why I use this snare is because that's going to fill the dynamics that the clap doesn't have. I've taken the bottom end out of the clap, and this snare will fill that bottom end to a degree, but it'll fill the mid-range of it, which will then give it a punchiness through the mix, which is really important, because if I play the track without that snare, there's no punch. If I play with the snare, it basically boosts up that clap. I focus on the clap being the lead, and the snare is there just to fill in the dynamics that you're missing, or what that clap might miss. You see, I could go on the clap itself and go on the EQ and try turning up the mid, but that's not going to give you the dynamics. It's just going to bring out whatever dynamics in there, which there isn't enough to fill that void, which that snare can do. So if you hear them together, it gives you a sound of your own clap. And on this snare, I've done quite a few bits to it. Again, like I said, I EQ it. I brought it up around the 200 mark, which is the mid-range area, which will give it warmth. 200 usually is like the warm area of anything. And like I said earlier, I've taken out the top end, not too much of it, but let's do that again. Around the 20k mark. You don't lose much at that area. You just have better clarity, better warmth in it. And then I've got a kickstart on it. I've got no idea why that should be on. It's probably turned off. I've got the L1 limiter. This is now to bring all the elements of that snare forward, bring it up, and make it sound, a bit more in your face. I then use this reverb remover. So I don't know why I've used this. I'll play it without it. There's no reason why that's on there. I've got no idea why it's on. SSL comp, again, like I say, I use it on everything. Gives it a bit more warmth, tightens it all up. Don't use it too much, otherwise you'll end up losing the dynamics of the sound. And then what I've done here, I've used a FabFilter Saturn. So this is a saturation unit, which will make things a bit more crispier. It'll make it snap a bit more. So if I play it with this on, and that's with it. This is with it off, sorry. And I'll play it with it on. You just got that bit more of a snap, a bit more on your face. It's a bit more of a, it's very similar to what an EQ can do, but I just find that the Saturn, the FabFilter Saturn, just gives it a bit more than what the FabFilter EQ would do. So I'd fully recommend that. I wouldn't use it on everything, but on certain elements of a track that you can't actually EQ in, because sometimes you'll think, oh, here's a synth, why can't I get to sound in place? Just use this Fab Filter Saturn and that will do the job for you. So if we go on to the hats, I use quite a few hats in the track, and this is where you'll find that I'll use the group track top beats right and left, which I described earlier. So you'll see here, this is multi-hat R, so that means multi-hat right. So if you look on here, you can see that I've got this part of the hats sent over to the right speaker. Then I've got multi-hat left, which is a different hat, which is sent to the left speaker. This is to give it more dynamic range in the mix. And I'll send them to, in fact that's not sent there, but it will be now, to top beats left, where the multi-hat left goes, and the multi-hat right will be sent to the group channel top beats right. Again, like I said at the beginning, you need it to go to a group which is going to represent the positioning where you're putting it, because if you put it in the middle one, you're going to lose a whole, you turn it this right or left here. So what I do with a lot of my hats, especially if I've got multiple of them, and it's going like this, I put a kickstart on it. This will give it more life in the track, and it will also make weight. It will dip it down a little bit for the kick to come through. And the kickstart is really, really simple to use. It's by Nicky Romero, and this is what I use to sidechain everything, because it's just the most simplest thing you can possibly use. I find it a lot of messing around when you've got to use sidechain compressions and sidechain compressors, and you've got to send bits and bobs to everywhere to get it to work and to have it triggered by a kick or triggered by whatever it's going to be. This here makes it very, very simple. You basically just put it on your insert, and this bit here, the mix control will determine how much sidechain you do. The only bad thing about this is you can only really set it to the kick. If you're ever going to sidechain something to like a sound or a snare, for whatever reason you might do, you can't, because this is just basically on the kick, keeping it very simple. And there's loads of different options here. The classic chain, which is that one, it gives it more room for the kick, and you can hear when I play it. And there's also different sizes you can choose. And again, you use the mix area here to determine how much of it's actually kicking in place. On this track itself, I've just used a free punch, which basically means that it's a far tighter, because it's only a hi-hat, so I don't need it to dip out too much. I just need it to dip out a little bit to give the pattern of a hi-hat a bit more life in the mix, and to drop out for the kick. So if I play it with the tune itself, or I'll play it with just a beat, I'll play it without. You see, it's just quite in your face, quite prominent. I'll stick it on with a kickstart on. You can hear it dipping in and out, which gives it a lot more life within the track. I then again use a Fab Filter, which you use on everything you should use if you're going to EQ it. The L2 Ultimaxer, which is another way of basically just bringing it up within the mix, bringing out each of the individual elements of the sound. So again, I'm not very technical, but this here is really easy to use. I'll just stick it on, and I'll just bring the threshold down to whatever sounds right, just to basically bring up all the elements to make that sound fuller. So say, an example of which would be, you got the sound, and then within it, you got the mid-range area of that sound, which is a little bit low within the mix of that sound. This threshold is basically just going to push everything up and just give it a bit more, life. And then I use the Fab Filter Saturn again, which is just saturating it, and it gives you a bit more chance to bring up certain elements. And in this case here, I wanted it to sound a little acidy, because the track itself is quite acid sounding. So by bringing up these elements, the top end and the mid, the two areas of top, the two areas of the top end. So you can click through here, there's loads of different options. I use this one because it gives you all these different sections which you can control. So if I play it, this is without it now, I'll have to mix it back on. And you can hear that makes it sizzle a bit more, particularly if you're making an acidy sounding track. You'll hear that the hi-hats are quite hard and in your face, and this is perfect to bring those up. So these hi-hats which I'm using here, I've recently put together a sample pack for CR2, which is made up of a lot of the samples we use for our tracks, and these hi-hats in particular are on that. You'll find that if you listen to this and you listen to the pack itself, the pack is made up of basically all the sounds we use for our beats. So the majority of these beats will be taken from our sample pack. Each of those have all been processed like here to give you the best sound possible. And then you'll still need to EQ it into your track to make it work. So as you see here, I'm still adding stuff onto them to make it work for this track particularly. Now, I'll just copy and paste this bit of hats there. Within the track later on, these hi-hats will play simultaneously. So the reason why I'm moving them over here now is just so you can get an idea of how it sounds. So like I said before, I have a multi-hats going left and right. If I put them together here, if you're listening on your headphones or you're listening in the studio, you'll be able to hear that it gives it a lot more depth. Two very, very similar loops of hats, as you'll hear here. Apart from that's got some sort of rim in it, just to give it a bit more life, I suppose. I suppose that's in the loop I've taken from the pack. And again, I've done pretty much the same as what I've done to the multi-hat right, with the kickstart limiter, the Saturn, and I think I've got some reverb on this for some reason. I've got reverb remover, so we can hear it without. You can hear there's a little bit of reverb on the original hits that I've put in. If I turn it on, it just takes it off. And again, this is really, really easy to use, this reverb remover. It's just basically, you use this centerpiece here. That's just basically saying how much you want to remove. If you remove too much, you'll end up having a bit of a clicky sound. Like that. This would have been the original. You can hear there's a little bit of reverb originally from the actual sample itself. You can't really tell too much because I've cut up these loops. So it's only got the amount that you can hear within the cut. That's why I've used this remover here to put it to 50%. It just tightens up that hi-hat and makes that hi-hat sound like one without reverb. I suppose that's what it's there for, so it's good. Then I've got another hats which are called quick hats, which here is again going down the right. To the left, bring that back to right. And that's just another hat which is similar to the others but with a bit more high end on it, less bottom end. And this is basically just to give the whole hi-hat section of the track a lot more life, a lot more dynamics. And that's what I do with most of my tracks. You know, I'll get the hi-hat areas, get multiple hi-hats to do the job of one hi-hat, but I'll place them around the track. So one to the left, one to the right, one maybe to the middle, or one to the left, far to the left, or one midway to the left. Just giving the whole track dynamics. And it's solely down to how you want the track to sound, what sort of vibe you're going for. So there's no right or wrong to do it. You need to do it by ear. What you can see on this hats here is I've also sent it to an effects unit here. So I've got a separate channel at the bottom of Cubase down here, which is its own reverb unit. So if I find it on there somewhere, I think it's over here. It's its own channel. So this channel here, on this channel, has this reverb unit, which is a KHS reverb, which again is really simple to use. There's only 6 dials on it. Decay, dampen, size, width, early, mix, all quite explanatory. The decay is what I've just brought down a little bit. The dampen I've brought down, and the size I've only given it a little bit just to give it a bit of just a little bit of reverb, and I'll send whatever want to use that reverb unit from their actual send, which I've done here on the hats, and then I can send it via here. I can choose how much send to do. So if I do too much of it, if we do more of it, there's more send. If we do less, there's less. But just be aware when you do that, it increases the volume because you're adding it to another channel. So you might want to play around with that. I wouldn't use a volume on the actual reverb channel itself because it's going to change it for all the other things you send it to. So that's why I'd use this send itself here, the send gain. So the inserts on this, again, it's a kickstart, like I said, giving it more life, just letting it dip on the kick. Fab filter, EQ, just because I always usually EQ my, well, I EQ everything just to make it fit in the track. And then again, the SSL compressor. Then I move on to some shakers. Again, this here is just EQ'd, similar to the other elements of the track. Kickstart again, but what I've used with this here, I've used an Ozone 8 imager, which is a stereo imaging tool, and it's dead easy to use. Well, the way I use it, it's dead easy to use. I don't understand the full complexities of the whole thing, but what I just do is click the stereoize button here, which isn't usually on. So you press this on, you'll move this up to whatever you want to do. And then I fiddle around these, like I don't fiddle around the bottom end, I fiddle around the two mids and the top. The best way to use this though is when you do it on headphones, because when you use it in the studio, you need to make sure your speakers are fully set up perfectly in the right position for you to really understand what's going on. But to make life easier, just do it on your headphones and you'll hear it instantly. I mean, you can mix that accordingly to how you want it to do. So the reason why I put it on this sound here, the shaker, is to basically stereoize it more so, make it wider sounding, opposed to the hats which are already doing it themselves by being placed within the mix right, left and centre. I will use that Ozone on quite a few things nowadays. I don't know if I use it on a lot of things within this track. No, I haven't, but usually I put it on a clap to give that width. I use it on quite a lot of the top end now. I've only recently started using it, so hence it not being on this track so much here. Then I've got the rim area. The rim area. I've got the rim of the track, which is this. Again, I EQ everything the same way. The Fab filter, SSL comp. Like I said, the SSL comp, you've got to be very careful to not use too much of it because you'll lose the dynamic range on the track. Sometimes you don't need it, but I'll use the SSL comp not just to tighten things up. I'll use it to bring things into the mix, different to using the volume. So I'm not too sure if this is the best example, but I'll try. Yeah, so you can hear it. So if I turn on the SSL here, I've used it in this instance to bring the actual sound itself into the track. So if I play it without the SSL being turned on, you can hear that rim sound sits a little bit outside the mix. So if you were to use this, if you were to open up this SSL comp from scratch, this threshold would be down here, farthest to the right. So I'll turn it back on and I'll show you what I do. I'll just move this threshold and use it to bring it into the mix, and you can hear it as I do it now. And as you can see, or as you can hear, that I brought it down to 3.4, and now that sound fits within the mix. And I'll use this on a lot of stuff. I've used it on the clap lead, so if I play the mix with it without the SSL being on, in fact I'll turn the threshold up to how it would be when you open it up. So now I'll turn the threshold down and I'll bring the clap within to the mix. Now you can hear that the clap sits in the mix perfectly. So I'll go right again, I'll play it with without it on, and now with it on. And now you can hear that the clap sits within the mix. But these things are so, the changes are so small. But when you're looking and listening to this now, you're probably thinking, oh, there's no difference. But when you're actually going over and over it as a loop, and you're focusing on that one sound, I always find when I focus on the sound, it always stands out and becomes more prominent. So you will hear the difference on that. So that's well worth using that SSL comp when bringing things into the mix, because some people would otherwise use the volume on the mixing desk or the mixer within the computer. But I find it a lot more easier, and you have a lot more control just mixing it in that way. But again, like I said, you've got to be careful that if the volumes turn too loud and you use a compressor to bring it too far in, you're going to lose the dynamics. Best way to show what I mean here. So if I get that clap, I'll turn the volume up. So that clap is now blatantly too loud. Some people would make the mistake now of using this compressor to bring it into the mix when it's too loud to start with. So here you go. And as you can see, you can do that, and it does fit it in to the track. But when you listen to the end mix, maybe not in your studio, but in a club or in your headphones, you will hear the difference that you've lost dynamics of that element. So that's why you should need to use this hand in hand with the volume. So if you turn it off there, and you get it in the best possible place in the mix by using the volume. So that clap now sounds in a good position to me. I'll now use the compressor just to make it fit in that little bit better without losing the dynamics, just using a little bit of it, and you should be able to hear a difference. Now you can hear that the clap now fits in the track properly. You've not lost too much dynamics of it because you haven't brought the threshold down too much, and there you go. That's with the clap, but you'd also do that with every other element. Well, I do it with every other element. So when I've moved off doing the beat area, I usually start looking at what the bass line is going to sound like. And what I should have touched on earlier on is when I go to the studio, I always have like a, sort of a template to work to, which is like I always have it set up with those group channels already set up, ready to go. I don't change any of the settings on any of them. I use them all the time like that. I did try doing it whereby I didn't use them, just thinking it might be quicker to do it without, or maybe it might give me more dynamics not doing that, because sometimes you might think, well, I did think, I might be wrong, but I don't know, that they might reduce the width of the track, because obviously you've got these compressors and warmers on there, which is potentially taking away the dynamics of the track itself. So I did try doing it whereby I didn't use that group. I mean, I just found myself messing around where I was, adding things to tracks which didn't need to be there to try and get the mix sounding the way I'm used to doing it, because I've been using this technique now for pretty much since I started producing. I think I saw a tutorial, it was called New York Compression at the time. I don't think that exists anymore, but that's where I got the initial idea from. So I've just used it since I ever started producing. And when I do go into the studio, I'll have usually the kick I'll have always set up the same, and the clap. And the reason why I have that done, I have the kick, hat, and snare and clap channels set up from old projects, is because I find it very easy that I can just take out that kick which might be used in that template and replace it with another one. Because I've got everything all set up in place, which I went through earlier, with the compression, the EQ, and that. All I need to do is really mess around with that. And usually I find that I don't need to mess around that much with it at all. Especially with this CR2 sample pack, which I've done, is I've used all the same settings to give you the master sound itself. So you can just drop it in there, and it won't take much messing around. You won't have to change the EQs and that, because they're all EQ'd to the same sort of like vibe, which makes life a hell of a lot easier when you want to get started making a track. And then also, when the actual arrangement of the track itself, I use the same arrangement on everything, and I find it quite annoying when, well, not annoying, but awkward when you go and look at other people's tracks and you think, why are they doing the arrangement like that? It just doesn't make sense because, in terms of mixing, I find that the majority of tracks go 16, working 16 bars. They go 16 bars, 32 bars, and that's it. That's it. Where each point the track changes. So you'll see with my tunes, if you look at the actual arrangement itself, you can see that there's a change every 16 bars. So the intro, you've got your change coming in there, just throughout the whole track. Adding little elements within the beat. Sometimes every 8 bars. Depends what sort of tune I'm doing. If I'm doing a radio edit or something which I want to use, it's going to be on radio. I might do a little small change every 8 bars. And the reason why I do that is someone taught me years ago the idea of ear candy. And ear candy is like, it sounds a bit ridiculous, but it does make a massive difference. But if you add something minuscule, but you can actually hear it being added, it keeps your brain interested. It keeps you interested in the track itself. So it might just be an additional hi-hat or a ride or something like that. It's going to keep your mind or the listener's mind interested, because if you have a part of your track which is just going on and it sounds the same for, I don't know, 64 bars, your mind's going to turn off to it very quickly, unless you're in a club and you're off your head, and then you probably don't care. It's cool. But I find with like house music is because there's not that much going on in it, and some of it can be repetitive. It's very important to have these ear candy moments where you have these little bits popping in into the mix. You'll see here with if I just play this I play the first 32 bars. For each bit that comes in, each bit of ear candy that gets added, I'll point it out and show you exactly what I mean. So there's 8 bars. Here's the ear candy moment, which is going to be a harsh ride which comes in. Here's 16 bars, a rim shot's going to come in. And like I said, these are really, really minuscule differences. That's a harsh ride which came in is panned to the left. Like I said, it's gone through the group left channel. It's also panned on its own mastered channel to the left. And if you're listening on your headphones or in a studio and your studio's set up right, you'll hear that it's coming really low on that side there, but it's pricked your ears up. It's kept you interested. So here I hit the 16 bar mark, and then I've got another rim, a rim sound coming, which is on the same like offbeat. You'll hear it from me now. So 2 elements came in there. The rim, which you probably can't hear because it's very low in the mix, but as I say, it's an ear candy moment. But I've also got the acid hats, which are these. So that just came in. So if you listen to it again. And then also what you can see here is the multi-hat left has just come out, and that's another 8 bars in from the last change. And when I say candy moments, it doesn't mean you have to add something. You can also take something out. It's just for general changes within the track, keeping your mind occupied and keeping it interested. These things here, they sound like stupid, maybe not stupid, but like you wouldn't think that it makes a difference. But believe me, now I've mentioned it, you will definitely hear the difference, and you will think, oh, that's quite a cool thing to do. Particularly in pop music, if you're producing pop music or anything which is, within pop tracks go between like 2 minutes 20 and 3 minutes 20. So you've got to get a lot of stuff going on in there to keep you interested, particularly if it's on radio. So that's why ear candy moments, particularly in those sort of tracks, if that's what you're making, or even if you're making a house track which is like more commercially viable. I mean, this track here is not commercial whatsoever, but if you're making a house track which is commercial, which you do aim to go on radio, you do need to have those parts taking place in it, because that's what people want to hear on radio. Because the general public who might not be into that sort of sound will have these, they want to be kept interested, and they won't be subliminally kept interested. They won't realise that they're being kept interested by these parts which you're putting in. So that's what I do. And then more about the arrangement side of things. So I'll do, if you ever mix any of my tracks or any of our Solardo tracks, you'll hear that they always drop in at around 1 minute. So it's usually 2 sets of 32 and bang, you in. Even though that wasn't a drop, but that's 32 bars in, and then that's the first main element of a track comes in, which is, in this case, is a vocal. So I'll play the track from the intro to the drop, and I'll speak you through the changes I do and the reasoning behind it.
Welcome to the future. Welcome to the future. Welcome to.
So you hear on all my tracks I ever make, it's the same structure. Kick cuts out. Sorry, the kick will be cut out for that first segment. The next segment will come in.
Welcome to the future. Welcome to the future. Welcome to the future.
And then you'll get another 16 bars in, and you'll get to the drop. And I'll have 64 bars here up until, well, 64 minus 16 is 40, no, 64 minus, well, whatever that is, 2 16s, 32 bars up here, then another 16 bars to here, and then I do a cut out with a kick. And the reason why I do these cut out points where the bass will come out, I might keep the bass in there. I haven't done it in this instance here, but a lot of the time I'll keep the bass sound in and the kick sound in, but I'll just take the bottom end out of both of them, and then maybe have, like in this case, as a sample, a vocal sample comes up on top of them. Is because, again, it keeps you interested. If you're inside in a club and it's boom, 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 boom all the time, and there's no change to it, you might get bored of it. Like I say, if you're off your head, you probably won't. But if you're not, in fact, if you are off your head, you do want these changes. So the bass will drop out, and then for 16 bars or 8 bars, and then bang, and it'll give that extra kick and that extra bass. You'll appreciate it far more because you've been without it for 8 or 16 bars. So that's the general arrangement side of things, and then what I do is I then move into doing the bass line. So the bass line here, I've just taken this bass line out of my CR2 sample pack. It's just, this is the actual loop itself, taken from the pack, just thrown straight onto this beat, which sounds like this. So that bass line itself was made on the Moog, which is over here. Recorded the audio, the MIDI and audio, then obviously quantized it, made it all into time, and then just recorded the audio itself. So this bass line here is automated slightly at the end, you'll hear. Or maybe it's not. But in the sample pack itself, there's different versions of this bass line, so there'll be different automated options. So you'll have the original, which is this, and then towards the end it'll open up and the filter will open up and it'll give you a lot more to mess around with. In this case, I've just thrown it on this track. I haven't done it, but I would do it if I'm spending more time on this track. But as I said before, when you get the samples themselves, you've got to find good, decent samples, which still have to have room for you to be able to move them around. Because if the sample you had from a sample pack was maxed out to the maximum bass or the maximum limiting, you're not going to be able to move around. You're not going to have any movement in the actual mix yourself. So, for instance, what I mean is, if the sample is maxed out, you can't really EQ it too much because there's no space for movement. So as you can see here, what I've done here on the actual mix of the bass itself, I've used the FabFilter Saturn once again. This is because I want to bring certain elements of the sound out, which I couldn't do in the EQ, which have been over with the beats. It's exactly the same with other elements of the track. You can use it on a bass line, you can use it on a synth, you can use it on a vocal, you can use it on anything. and it's just giving you more control over sort of dynamic ranges that an EQ wouldn't be able to do. So in this case here, I've just brought the mid-range area of the bass line up, which you can see it's plus 4 dB. Then the top mid I brought up by plus 4 dB, and then only a slight bit on the proper top end of it, 0.90 if you want to be exact. Then I've stuck on a limiter, which in this case has made the bass line distort slightly. But that effect itself fits and works well in this track itself. Sometimes if you're mixing something down and you add something and it makes it sound distorted, try listening to it within the mix, because sometimes that distortion works in your favour. I use distortion units all the time, so I will use the Sound Toys Decapitator, and I'll use it on, I haven't used it on anything in here surprisingly, but I would usually use it on a track which I'm going for, you know, like a warmer sound or a thicker sound. Say if I put it onto a, if I'll show you, Here you see with a clap, I'll use a preset, the drum fastener 1. Dead simple. So when you open up, I'll take the capacitator off. When you open up the actual VST itself, it'll open up as default, and then I'll just flick through here through the menu at the top and go straight to drum fastener 1 or drum fastener 2. I use either one of these. Drum fastener 1 I find has a lot more top end in it. Drum fastener 2 will take off a lot of the top end. So if I'm mixing a track, which in this case is an acidy sounding track, and I want them to be quite standout, have a bit of, you know, like crispy crackle on them, I use a drum fastener 1. If I want it to sound more dull, if I'm going for an old sounding track, because some of our tracks we try and make sound old, I use a drum fastener 2. Drum fastener 2 will take off the top end of it and make it sound a lot more warmer, or older, should I say. Drum fastener 1 will give it more top end, and basically it will fatten up the sound. So if I play this clap now without it, sounds decent. If I play it with it, it does what it says on the box. Basically, it's just fattening up that drum. But what I would always do here is look at the meter, the limiter. What's it called? Sorry, look at the meter, and then you mess around with this mix bit here. And you want to bring it down on the dry and wet area, just so it's bouncing underneath 1. If you go into the red, sometimes it does it a little too, give it a bit too much distortion, and it doesn't sound right. So in this case, I'm now just under 1. So if I go back to the bass line, what I use on here also is, just like I said, it's very similar. I use a lot of the same stuff on each of the elements of the track. So again, the Saturn, I've just been through that. The limiter, again, in this case, I've put it on a little bit. It's making it sound distort, but sometimes that's what you want. And then I use this thing called the R bass. Now this will bring out certain elements of the bass line that an EQ might miss. This is really good. So at the top here, the frequency, you can search through the frequency you want to mess around with. So in this instance, I've used 50 Hertz. And 50 Hertz is usually the sub bass area of the track, or of the sound. And then you use the intensity area to see how much you use. So if I play this with this off, now I'll play it on. That's adding more bass, but also it's adding a little bit more distortion, which in this case, when I made this track and I was mixing it together, it worked out well for me. But sometimes you've got to be careful using this, because if you don't want that added distortion and it doesn't work for your track, you'll need to make sure you mess around with this intensity a bit to make sure you've not got too much going into that additional frequency which is set up on the R bass. So again, this is dead easy to use. You can use it with loads of different elements. I use it either on a kick drum or a bass or sub bass. I'm not too sure if you can use it on anything else because I don't use it, but that's what I use it for. And then again, I've gone into the FabFilter EQ. Now in this case, it might have been a bit too much for me to use the R bass and the fab filter, because the R bass is going to give you that extra bass that you want. But what I've done, the reason why I've done this here is to cut off the bottom end of the sub. So perhaps I don't need to add this much here, the additional 50, because the R bass is doing it. But when I'm mixing it down, it sounded like I needed to just do it, so it worked out for me. I've also taken this bottom end off. So I do this with all my bass lines. The reason being is because this area of the bass line is giving you a frequency that a lot of people can't hear or speakers don't pick up. It'll just make your mix muddy. So if you cut this bottom area off, you've got to make sure you can do reasonably by ear. You'll be able to hear that this area here isn't really giving you anything but a bit of mud and mudding up your mix, and also giving you less opportunity to turn the volume of your track up in the mastering stages of the actual track. So be wary when doing this here. Be wary of leaving it, should I say. Like, if you can take anything off and then still keep the sub, I would say take it off. I've taken off the top end, and well, a bit of the top end in this, just because obviously that works in the mix. Also, just to speak about, you know, the taking the bottom end of stuff off, I would do that in pretty much every part of the mix. Like I say, this frequency down here isn't needed in your mix. All it's going to do is give you less dynamics to turn up in the master stages of the track. So if you can just do by ear to the fact that you can still hear the bass or feel the sub, and the sub's coming through well, you can take this off. As long as you don't, as soon as you start hearing the sub disappear, you're taking too much off. So again, it's just all completely down to ear. I can't really explain it in the best possible way, because all these sounds are different. They all have different frequencies. It's just you have to mess around for yourself to get the right sound. I've used SSL compressor again. This time this is to tighten up the sound, just exactly the same way as what you do with your beats and your kicks. Again, you've got to be careful that you don't lose too much dynamic range in it. But when it comes down to a sub, you don't need too much dynamic range. You just need to be hitting bang on in the middle, doing what it's there to do, and just basically plow through what's there. So it doesn't need to be dynamically spread across the mix, unless it's a synth bass sound, which you might use to say if you make, for instance, a future house sounding track, where all of the held and sort of type bass lines do sound 3D-ish. That's where you've got to be careful if you're using an SSL comp, because you're going to lose that dynamic. For the bass lines I do, they're more like driving sub-orientated bass lines with not much dynamics. It doesn't matter too much if you use this SSL comp too much, because you're not worried about losing dynamics of the actual sound itself. But again, it all comes down to what you're mixing and what you're doing. And then again, the kickstart, which I said from the beginning, I use all the time. This is a sidechain bit of kit, which is dead simple, and I recommend thoroughly when using any bass lines whatsoever is to use it. So if I just put the kick on itself, the kick and a bass line, this is a good way of showing exactly what it does. If I do it without, the kick isn't doing what it should be doing fully. I mean, you might not be able to tell particularly well listening back now, but you will definitely be able to hear in a club. So if you turn the kick start on, the kick's pounding through, and the kick is adding that element of bass which has been taken out with this sidechain. So this sidechain basically is going to drop the sound of that sub. When that sub drops, that means the sub of the general track coming from that sub is going to drop also. That's why if you EQ your kick to a level of sub whereby it's going to fill that void, you're going to get the perfect mix. Sometimes people use kicks. I hear it in a lot of tracks whereby they just throw the kick in. They don't really look too much at the bigger picture. So when I say that, I mean you might throw a kick on something and think, oh, that kick sounds good. I'll just throw a sidechain on the sub or the bass line and it'll work. But what you need to do when mixing your kick and your sub together is do it at the same time. So what I've done in this case here is when I've got to the mixing stage of the bass line, I'll then go back to the kick, which I might have previously thought was mixed right, and then start moving it around so that I make sure that I get this sub to fit with that kick. It doesn't need to be the same key. Some people will make it well, some people like to have the same key kick as the sub. But for me, I think it's better and it gives you more dynamics and gives you more movement and life if you just throw a kick in. Not worried too much about it. Some genres of music want it to be absolutely perfect and it fit perfectly. But I find that for my mixes and my tunes, it gives it more life, not really thinking too much into it. A good example of when you don't think too much into it is when you make heavy techno music. So if you were to make your kick for a techno track, you'd have a sub bass which might be like a and you'll have your kick, which will then you'll use this sidekick, kickstart, to side chain it so the kick fully comes in, and then the sub itself will act as the trail of that actual, the techno sound which you go and go boom, 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 and that's done by the kick, and then that sub side chaining. And the best way to get the ultimate sound there would be to have it, two different keys, because that way you get the wobble sound in the kick, which is really cool in techno. Some people in techno want to make it exactly the same, but I think it adds a lot more life and a lot more wobbly onto a kick if you don't go for the same key. So as you can see here with the sidechain itself, if you have it off, if you have the sidechain off, you're going to have the two bass lines bouncing into each other, therefore causing distortion, therefore causing that area of the track to clip. So again, the sidechain is really important to make you not have that. So there you go. So that's with, that's without. Very important part of kit. Even if you don't use this kickstart or you use sidechaining in general, it's really important to sidechain. I mean, I was in the studio with a really, really big, well-known producer of a different genre of music, and he'd never done this before, and he'd gone his whole career of like 20 years spanning without using sidechain. And then when I showed him this, he was just like, I can't believe I've not used it before. So it's something you should definitely try doing in your tracks. So in this track, I've got a vocal running through it, which is it's again from the Solardo sample pack. You'll hear it here.
Welcome to the future. Welcome to the future. Don't welcome to the future. Welcome to the...
So what I've done on this, I didn't have to do too much to it because I've previously mixed it in the sample pack, but to make it fit within the actual track itself, I've used, like I said, and I use all the time, the SSL comp, the L2 Ulti-Maximizer to bring it out a little bit to make sure you can hear it properly, because sometimes, when you stick a vocal within a track, you can't hear it, it's not loud enough. But it's not the case that it's not loud enough. It's the case that the elements of that, whatever's been said, aren't being pushed to the forefront. And in this case, I've needed to bring it to the forefront. Therefore, I've used the L2. I've then used a ping pong delay unit, and this comes with Cubase. It's a standard plugin which comes by Steinberg with Cubase. The reason why I use this is because it's dead easy to use. And what I've done with this to make the actual sample interesting itself, I'll put a delay of a 16th on there.
Welcome to the future.
But one thing I've done on this which makes it quite interesting is that I've used this spatial knob, whatever it is down there, to turn the full spatialness up to the maximum. And what that does is, when it's delaying, the delay is bouncing between the two speakers, giving it a stereo feel of it. So this vocal itself is pretty standard, pretty flat. So by doing this, it's making it more interesting. It's bouncing in between the two speakers. I've used a low end filter so that when the back end of the delay, as it delays out, it's not the same signal as when it says the word in the first place. So by that I mean that if it wasn't in, you're going to have the delay part of the actual vocal sounding the same as the original track part of the vocal. So I'll show you what I mean. So if I've not got this low cut filter on,
welcome to the future.
So if I turn the filter up, this is going to take the bottom end out of the delay.
Welcome to the future.
And by doing that, that keeps the actual lead part of that vocal, the vocal itself, as the forefront, so not the delay part. So if you have if you have that low filter not turned on, you're going to have the vocal to sound like it's multiplying itself. So that's what I do with that. I've turned down the mix just so it's just at 18%, so that only a certain part of the vocal is actually delaying. And then the feedback is turned really low, down to 5.5%. That way it's not tailing out. Pretty self-explanatory stuff. But in this case, what makes it relevant is when you're working at 1/16 and you've got the spatial going between the two speakers, if you keep the feedback turned down low, it gives it an effect opposed to a delay. It just gives it a 3D effect, which in this case is this.
Welcome to the future.
And that's what I've done on that to make it fit within the track. Now, there's different ways of using that delay. It all depends on what you want to achieve. In this track here, it's an acidy sounding track. I wanted the vocal to sound quite robotic, quite, moody. So that was my reasoning and thinking behind using the delay unit in that way. But obviously, as you must know, you can do anything you want with delays. It's completely different. And then I've used some automation at the beginning of a vocal, using a Fab Filter Simplon. As you can see, when the vocal comes in at the beginning of the track, it's the top end is missing. Again, the reason why I do this is to keep the listener interested. If I was to have no automation upon this vocal, and the vocal was to go throughout the whole intro, which is 62 bars, you'd be pretty bored of it by the time you get 32 bars in, because it's repeating. So the reason why I've had this automation go on is just like I say, ear candy, to keep the listener interested. Within Cubase, the automation is dead easy. If you go onto the vocal itself, make sure it's clicked on the vocal, then you go on the Simplon here, which is the same in obviously all DAWs that you might be using. All you do is click record, mess around with it there. Take record off, press R, and you'll see it's all recorded in how you want. The cool thing with this new Cubase is what previous Cubases didn't have is that you can curve the automation. So what I've done here is curved it in, opposed to what it used to be that you could only go in straight lines, so it was like quite jagged. This way it makes it a lot more, smoother, the whole process. So as you can see, it just builds up, and then come 16 bars in, you've fully got the whole sound as it should be. And there's your vocal. So that vocal's in the sample pack also, and I use this on the drop, which you can hear now.
Welcome to the future. Done.
And that's that. So later on in the track, I bring in a string element to, like I said, to keep people interested, which is this. Again, this is from the sample pack. I've just stuck it straight into the track itself. It's in the same key as the bass line, so that way that they don't sound like they're wrong. To keep the bass and the stuff around it, so the synths or the strings, whatever you might use, I always try and keep in the same key, so you get a smoother feel, a smoother ride, and it just doesn't sound weird. So what I've done on this string, again, I use the same stuff on everything really. The kick start, only slightly on it here, just to make it bounce, give it a bit of life, let the kick come through a bit more. Fab filter just to EQ it. Again, took the bottom end out. I've brought it up at around 100, 200 to give the sound some warmth. I've taken off the top end to get rid of those frequencies that might give you headaches. And to compensate, taking off the top area, I've just brought it up at 5K, which is all very dependent on what sound you're using. But I find that if you bring up the top area here, and bring a bit more up here, you're not going to lose any of the sound quality or the original sound. You're just going to get rid of the frequencies that you don't really want going on. I've used a ping pong delay. The reason why I've used this is not to get a delay effect, it's to give it more of a stereo effect. So As you can see with the feedback, it's turned down to 12%, really low. The mix of it is down to 10%, really low. But again, what I've used here is the spatial element of this ping pong delay on the Cubase compressor, delay unit. This means that, like I said, with a vocal before, it's got a short delay, so it's just keeping it short, and it's adding spatial width within the mix. So for this string or whatever you might use it on a synth or whatever, you just make basically, especially if it's just one continuous sound, you're going to get the delay within it, but it's going to be on either side. So you're going to have a left and right in the middle. It just saves you left and right or something. It's just really cool. And then again, the SSL compressor. This is just to bring it within the mix. On here, when I spoke about earlier, not using too much of it. In this case, I'm not using much, but I've had to turn the threshold down quite a lot to get the compression that I was after. There's no right or wrong with how much threshold you use. You just want to go by the actual meter itself. See, sometimes with some sounds you can have a threshold down to 0 and the meter will be up to 20. But some sounds when they're lower, you can have it up to 0 where it is now. You can see it's just bouncing at 4. Between 4 and 8. So I'm not losing any width on it. And then after that, I've got the synth area of a track, which is this part. Again, that's in the sample pack itself. Again, that's also in the same key as the string and the bass line. That way you can play them on top of each other and they don't clash. I've used the kickstart again, as I use in everything, again, as I've said multiple times, just so the kick comes through and it sounds better within the mix. The Fab Filter EQ, again, I've just done things, I've just mixed it around to whatever sounds best. As you can see, I've taken off the top end and compensated by putting it around the 7 or the 5 mark. And I've taken off the bottom end for frequencies which you just don't need within that mix. Again, I've used the ping pong delay, as I have done on the string and the vocal, to give it more 3D width, make it sound like it's bouncing around each of the speakers. It sits out in the mix and makes it a bit more interesting. And then lastly, I've used the L1 limiter and SSL compressor just to bring out the sound, and then the compressor itself is just bringing down the sound to fit it within the mix. And then there you have it, it's mixed in a track. And then one last thing you can see here is on the master chain itself, which if you go to the master right at the end, where everything's running through, I've got what's called a Dada Life Endless Mile. Now this is really good if you want to get like a build up on a drop. And again, it's dead easy to use. You just open it up, and when you open it up, it'll look just like this. And all you need to do is use this intensity area, and it'll give it its own sort of like a reverb, but give you that hands in the air moment you might be looking for if that's what you're after on a drop, for instance. So the reason why I put it on the master is because it saves me putting it on each of the individual tracks I want to do. Because on a drop, usually you want it to be hands in the air, everyone get involved. And what you can see here with the automation, I've automated it here so that the master is going to feel the effects of this. Watch it happen as it listen and watch as it goes through.
Welcome to.
So it just gives it that area effect. And if I put it on in the track in general, and what's cool about this is he put his hand up just as much as you would expect the crowd to. So don't know what he's taking, but it looks like he's fully involved. So that's your lot for today. Remember, if you want to find out where we're up to and what we're doing, go and check us out on our socials at Solardo on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Also, remember that to make this track, we've used our new sample pack, which is through CR2. It's out now. and it's basically going to have all the sounds which are in this track. You can get them on a sample pack along with loads of other samples you can use to your heart's content. So go and grab it. We'll see you next year, hopefully.